every time you come back, the word human takes on a different meaning. So it's really, really challenging. But, the question comes up all the time because it's a practical question and it requires a practical response because we still have to function in a practical world to the degree that we must, right? To the degree we have to address our responsibilities and to the degree that we're willing, ready, and able, we have to come back to the default mode. And that's really the greater integration. The greater integration is going into these higher planes of consciousness, understanding that there's a whole world up there, so to speak. There's this whole funky dynamic that has moving pieces and bells and whistles and colors and functions that is beyond what my previous model of understanding would allow me to even come into contact with. And so now here I am deployed into the cosmos and functioning there for 4 or 5 hours or whatever it is. But I have to come back, right? And I come back and the bell rings and ceremony's coming to a close and I feel the psychoactive effects start to wane and I'm really coming back into my own and feeling this body again and looking around and seeing a physical space around me where 2 minutes ago I was completely disconnected from body-mind complex. I was completely disconnected from linear time, disconnected from a defined environment. I was literally in the cosmos floating around for hours, right? Like a newborn little thing saying, oh my gosh, look at this, right? And it's like intergalactic tourism. There's just so much to see and do. And I'm trying to take snapshots and write this down and buy a local book and go to the souvenir shop before I come home. And I'm thinking I'm going to bring all this with me. And then here I am coming back into the default mode, back in body mind, back in physical environment, back in situation where I see a bucket next to me that's filled with vomit. And what do I do now? Who am I? Where am I going? If that was real, then what's this? If this is real, what was that? You have to try to integrate this stuff. You have to try to make sense of it. Mm-hmm. So what experiences have you had with integrating kind of the higher plane of existence and awareness with this, let's say, default mode? And where do we find a middle ground to function without getting lost in the concept of a refrigerator for 3 hours?
I mean, there's just a cultural element that you need to consider that I'm trying to just impart.
Yeah.
Picture what I'm saying. It's like, this is just part of life.
You go in, you get cleaned up, and it's chop wood, carry water. You get on with it, right?
And it's like a very blue collar cultural, like even putting together the ceremony is very like the men are like, exactly, chopping wood, lifting, carrying stuff, building the teepee. It's grounded in and of itself. Yeah, you eat this medicine that launches you to the moon, but then it's like back in the morning, it's like very practical, plain people. Like, to me, I love that feeling of like, this is just very down to earth activity. It's like we do this awesome magical thing and then it's just like, boom, straight back to like.
But that's if you have that kind of grounding default mode.
It happens to be that culturally. That's why I just want to bring that up.
And that's important, right? It's important to have kind of a brick and mortar kind of understanding of the integration process, because if I come back down from a ceremony and I have these, let's say, grounding responsibilities, then I'm almost better equipped at integrating because the fence has to get put up, right? The fire has to get built because people have to eat. But what happens to the average Western mind who's a digital nomad, who's all up in the mind all the time and doesn't necessarily have this grounding plane of default reality to pull them back from that intergalactic trip that they just took? Now it's like, holy shit, we might be even worse off as Westerners going into these states if we come back and already have, let's say, a default mode that's designed to keep us in the cloud all the time. It's very hard.
Yeah, and I'm going to be a pain in the ass again, like I always am, and harp on, here's why the tools that come with the original instructions are really important, because all of them that I've been to, several different cultures, several different backgrounds, they all have some elements of closure.
Yes.
That a ceremony is a thing, a real thing on its own that opens, and a real thing on its own that closes.
Yes.
I'm not saying it can't be done, but I don't know how to accomplish it on my own without the tools. I'm just not smart enough. Every ceremony I've seen has a way of closing it, right? In the peyote world that I come from, everything comes in fours, kind of, and throughout the night there's free waters in the ceremony. Then the ceremony officially ends, right? And there is this fourth water that's out of ceremony, right? So we leave ceremony and sort of there's a culture that you're supposed to kind of stick around. We're going to have breakfast together outside sometime later in the day. And there's this very interesting thing that many people don't notice, which is this is like the last component of the ceremony that happens after the ceremony is done. So what happens in the ceremony, then you leave, it's over officially, right? And then there's this closing water that happens outside of the ceremony after. We could talk about the specificity of this tool versus any other, but my point is the ways that I've seen all come with tools designed for closing what was opened, landing back on the floor. I know you're vegetarian, not to pick on this topic, but I know there was ayahuasca people particularly, it was all about you don't eat meat in advance, right? This was their thing. You don't eat meat in advance. There's a whole bunch of other things you don't eat because you're getting escape velocity. We're trying to leave. This is downward energy. This is ground earth energy, right? Meat, for example. After, it's meat soup. Like it's about landing back on the ground. That was their thing. I'm not getting into the specifics of meat in general, but I'm just saying like there's energetic knowledge about what is upward energy, what is downward energy. Right. In the peyote ceremony, they also have a meat thing. You eat breakfast in the ceremony. There's corn, there's berries, and there's meat, deer meat. And everyone eats a piece, even vegetarians. I've watched them do it. They eat a piece just because there's an energetic understanding of this is how you come back. Like sustenance brings you back in general. And then there's certain types of energetic foods with the quality of grounding.
Yes.
They just have that quality. Forget about the particulars of why it's good or bad or whatever. My point is that back to our original conversation and me griping about all the things that are being lost, et cetera, I'm not just being grumpy. I think there's a real wisdom in it, right? It's like you just took a rocket ship to other dimensions, and with a Western mind, you have no idea how to get back. I mean, you just don't. You might by sheer luck alone. But the original blueprints that all these things come from, they had a method for landing. They just did. And I'm not saying there's no other way to land.
Right.
Or there's no other way to, you don't need the drum. You could use some other tool.
They're just efficient ways and inefficient ways.
These are just the tools I already know exist, right? This is like thousands-year-old of intelligence. It's like if I gave you a blueprint how to build a car and you said, nah, and like started learning about car parts. It's a little naive to, like, I wouldn't throw it out. I mean, I wouldn't recommend throwing it out, right? Take the blueprint that you were handed, right? But the first time you eat mushrooms, you're like, holy shit, the tree's alive. That's like a holy shit moment, right? But then there's another layer of like, duh, the tree's alive. You get to this other place where like, of course, right? So now imagine a whole culture with a complete embodied awareness. Like everyone knows that and feels it, and it's clear as day, common sense, right? When you have adopted that much of an obvious awareness of a certain set of, like a whole other set of things, there's a whole another set of common sense that accompanies it. It's just common sense. So for me, as a Westerner with my Western mind, I need to eat medicine and to activate a whole bunch of things that were probably very obvious to people who just like lived in a purer state than I do, right? It's just obvious. It's just common sense. You could just sit there in the ceremony and you pay attention like I was told to do. You just watch people get tangled. You just watch it happen. Like I was saying, the drum, like we got to just battle through all these people, this individualism, right? There's sometimes right before, like there's a time in Midnight Water, a man brings water, and there's an energetic moment for a man to do something. And there's an energetic moment for a woman to do something particularly unique. If you're paying attention, you can sort of see the moment, why it makes sense for a man's energy right now or a woman's energy. But there's a moment before you're drumming, you're just banging, you're trying to get all the individualism out of the space, and someone throws up. We call it getting well. Someone throws up, and you just see this holy shit, like this whole thing is about to just, the whole space is about to just implode. And it's just contagious. It's just the whole thing, everyone, no one can hold it. There's just not enough experience in the room how to hold this energy, like there's an energetic, and like people just can't sit in it, right? So you see this person gets well, throws up. And there's a way we deal with it, right? And no one, just like I said about entanglement, nothing can cross that, right? So if someone comes to clean it in a very particular way, and while he's cleaning it, someone over here gets well. And now the person who was cleaning it is literally trapped. The guy who's in charge of cleaning is physically trapped, okay? Because he can't cross that. He has to get to the door over here. He was cleaning something over there, and that person threw up. So he's now trapped and no longer can clean. So someone else has to step in, clean that, get it out properly, deal with it the proper way. Then he can cross, okay? Because he's stuck, now he's standing on stage with this person's wellness on a shovel, right? because everyone's sitting on the ground and this is all going on in front of, so this guy's essentially standing on stage and the people are not disciplined enough to hold themselves throughout this delay. Okay. And let's just add another layer, which this happens. Let's say the instruments were at the person before this person. So they can't pass it until that's cleaned and this person has been seated off. So the instruments can't move. So the drum stops. When the drum stops for too long, like as a drummer, you got to keep things moving, because if the drum stops, the people mind, if you're with a undisciplined set of Westerners, the minds will just evaporate. Yeah. It's instant. So this guy's standing on stage, the drum is stopped, that person's getting well. Someone who's never cleaned up before is now cleaning up and doesn't really know what they're doing. So they're getting coaching tips from this guy on how to clean that. Okay. And while all this is going on, there's no drum and everything, that person gets well. Because the energy it went totally flat. The drum stopped. There's nothing. It's just a disaster. Now this guy gets that out. That one can leave. He goes to clean that one. Now the instruments move, and then there's some other, you know what I mean? You're watching the entire energetic space implode. And there's just no doubt in your mind as you watch this over and over and over and over and over, and in a million different varieties of this too. You see it work perfectly. You see no glitches. Random night, nothing glitched. It all just worked. And then the next night it's a disaster. It's like everything fell apart. And then usually it's a disaster and then it gets back. It's just like your car. It's like, oh crap, we got a flat. We take it off. We jack it up. We change the tire. We're back on the highway. It doesn't mean the night's ruined. It just means like, wow, we got a flat. Like we got a flat. But my point is, when you watch this unfold so many times over and over again, it is clear as day. You've changed the tire, you get back on the road, and now it's like we're going 5. We need to get it back up to like 90 again, right? If we're going to actually... I think the key point is like, if you sit in it and you pay attention, that's all I can tell you. Of course, they're all entangled. I just watched him go pat her on the back while she was vomiting, and now he's outside, it's just, of course, they're all entangled. And then you watch from that perspective, right? Being totally anal about how people move, like, whoa, you go on the other side of it, like being totally anal about it. Then you just watch how people interact on an everyday basis. And our culture in particular, I think, as Americans, is like extremely Edie and shitty on the Edie shitty scale. Yes. Like extra. Like you go to Russia, you guys know Russian culture. You tell me, I don't know. You go to Norway, you go on a bus, you do not look at anyone, let alone sit next to them. Like, what are you doing? You're looking at me on a bus? And there's a place where it's cold, but there's another place where it's just like sort of an ingrained sense of the sharing of multidimensional fluids. And you sit in the ceremonial space where it's held a certain way, and you just watch the interplay, the energetic interplay between people. And it's so obvious that people are entangling themselves. And on the flip side, when you watch it not policed properly, after having sat in it where you watch it policed properly, you see the short-term effects of an entanglement, which could be lifelong. Some cultures say stuff about everyone you sleep with, you have an entanglement with, and it makes perfectly good sense. It's like you're exchanging physical fluids, not just all of it, multidimensional stuff, right? So it's like when you sit in the space, if I can accomplish anything having this conversation, I just hope people know there's stuff worth looking for. It's not that I can tell you what it is or that I even get it, but it's like when you go pay attention, because there's stuff that's worth getting that isn't the stuff you think you're going to get. Like you think you're going to get healing and you're going to physically, whatever, all those things. There's other stuff. Like just pay attention to the ceremony side of it. Like there's stuff you'll learn about human interaction, entanglement. Like you said, it's like, it becomes so obvious. I have no other answer other than like, duh.
Right, the issue is that we have to kind of transcend the gross senses to understand and experience these finer energies, right? We're getting tons of data. We're just not pulling it in because we're relying on 5 basic primal receptors for the data, right? Where it's so much richer and so much more robust than what we care to believe. And that's the challenge. We're so busy approaching everything with these 5 senses and the mind as the governor of the 5 senses that we're missing the whole point. We're missing all of it. This goes back to the dog whistle. But beyond that, I mean, there's an easier approach, let's say, to receive some of this multisensory data, and that is to bring the mind back into balance with the five senses. And so we have this preoccupation with, let's say, our gut instinct and our intuition, our sixth sense. We have such a preoccupation with that, but we, again, think that it comes online randomly by accident. We neglect how much control we have over our ability to tap into that sixth sense. Now, the way to do it is to just bring the mind back into balance instead of having it be the governor of information between up and down, between the physical plane and, let's say, the metaphysical plane. If we were just to bring the mind down to the level of the other five senses and have almost like a board of directors style approach to it, as opposed to these five employees and one boss, then all of a sudden what happens? We take our five senses and combine it with the mind, which is another ability of ours to sense things, right? And make sense of things. Then we have a sixth sense, right? When the mind drops down to the level of the other five senses, we have six senses. And from that state of harmony, we can start to experience the extrasensory data that we are swimming in. We're never going to be able to do it so long as we elevate the mind to this role of either boss or governor or regulator. As long as that's at play, we are literally blocking ourselves from a very vibrant and rich world of information that is very happy to inform us and cooperate with us every step of the way. But in order to do so, in order to access this plane of awareness, the only way to do that is to give up what we think we know and to just bring the mind down to the level of the other senses and work harmoniously as one team. Until we do that, we're literally missing the whole thing because we're functioning from a part of it. We're functioning from our mind exclusively. And then we miss the boat, man. We're getting in our own way. It's the number one limiting factor to think that we know anything here.
That's our starting place is bad shape.
Yeah.
Like imagine a society where just the starting place was good shape, because I'm sure they existed, right? You just, and I use the stupid example of knowing the tree's alive, like a culture where you're born and everyone's in good shape. The people are acutely aware of the fact that the tree is alive. To us, that's like a mind-blowing discovery we make.
We have a different form of sickness, whereas the kind of ancient cultures didn't have this Western sickness. They don't even understand it. Their problems were very tangible, like broken leg, right? Snake bite, very tangible problems. And the medicines were used for very different purposes to what we discussed previously, as far as harnessing a room to focus on, let's say, one intention or one specific point of energy. They had the ability to do this because they weren't so individually sick. But our Western illness right now is very foreign to any illness that, previously kind of came about. We're dealing with a mental illness. We're dealing with a mental illness that's so profound yet subtle at the same time that we don't even know we're sick. And that's why if you want to know who the tough cases are in the medicine world, it's the guy that says, oh, I'm good, I don't need medicine. It's like, oh, shit, there you are.
Love to see
it's
it
like,
full of
found
medicine.
you.
Would love to see it full of medicine. That's what we thought when we heard that.
Yeah.
Would love to see it. What happens?
Yeah, you get...
I completely agree with everything he just said.
I don't know how to say it properly, but some of these ancient cultures, when one person in the tribe would be, let's say, overusing the mind, it would be very obvious to the whole group because it would create a disharmony and a distortion within the tribe that was so palpable that everybody would be able to identify something was going on. That one-off case within the tribe that was so noticeable is represented almost by our entire society right now.
Baseline.
Right, and it turns into the new kind of homeostasis. It's the baseline, right? So how do you measure against that when that is the defining mark on the scale? We've gotten so far off baseline that we've reestablished a new baseline, which is man so far and away sick compared to where we should be and where we started off, that it blows our mind to even accept that is a level of illness. It's become our default mode, our standard operating procedure comes from there, starts from there. We indoctrinate the children from there. We condition the society from there. So we're so caught up that we're like many layers deep on this thing. And that's why the first kind of stage in getting well on this level is coming to the conclusion of how sick we really are. That's where we have to start. So it's like we're going into these ceremonies not getting well. We're almost going into these ceremonies recognizing how sick we are. And it takes us multiple ceremonies just to recognize how sick we are before we can heal, right? Because how can you heal a condition that you're completely unaware of as being inappropriate?
Yeah.
So it's like me personally, I had to go back into this medicine space multiple times. And every time when I think, okay, I had my aha moment last time, like I realized the tree was alive. It's like, yes, okay, finally I got it. I'm well. Now I can go in and learn something. I go in and it's like, okay, I'm going to learn something. I'm going to learn, oh my gosh, I'm clinging to another layer of sickness. Look at this. Now you don't see that not only is the tree alive, but the tree is, outputting oxygen that you're breathing. So now you have to see the oneness of it all. And it's like, okay, I got my aha moment. We are all one. Yes, we're all one. And I go back into the medicine. I'm ready to get my vision. I'm ready. I'm done with my healing. And it's like, okay, now that you've realized that we're one, now recognize what a mess you're making every time you purchase the wrong product or create waste or do. And it's like, I think I'm clean every time I go into it. And I'm ready for the next step, only to recognize how dirty I really am. And until I get a really well-defined understanding of the sickness, only then can I start to heal and undo certain aspects of it. So the beginning years for me were really an introduction to myself, being able to even look in that mirror that we were talking about long enough to see all the ways that I'm caught up, and to see all the ways where I'm causing damage to myself and my ecosystem before I was able to even begin to undo some of this stuff. And that's why integration for me was like this glaring kind of missing piece of the puzzle, because how do you integrate the awareness that everything that you know might not be right, might not be the totality of knowing, might not even be beneficial to you? It's like, how do you integrate this awareness? How do I integrate this space of knowing that everything that I know is maybe even counterproductive? I have to really kind of take it back to the fundamental beginning of all things. And then that pulls on really heavy questions that we might not be able to or be comfortable with approaching. It's like, who am I in the first place? Who is this I that got all tangled up? Is that really what it is? When I saw it was all one, if it's all one, how can I be? And it starts bringing up these really existential questions that, frankly, in the beginning are too heavy to deal with. So I instantly want to look away and, go eat something to ground myself and watch something to make sure that that concept, not even a thought, but that concept, that model of potentiality doesn't unfold any further, because I'm not ready to deal with that. I'm not ready to see myself on such a level, with such clarity. Then you run from it. Okay, I'm not doing that again for a little while. And then, 24 hours passes and you're like, all right, sign me up. Maybe there is something more to it.